Hi, Shuv. We're starting again. My talk was listed as being in English, so I'm going to speak in English. But you can ask questions at the end in Hebrew if we have time. I'm going to try to make sure we have time. And I will try not to speak too quickly, which I tend to do. And even native English speakers can't always understand what I'm saying because of that. So I will do my best. And feel free if I'm talking too quickly to be like, slow down, Miriam. Okay. So hi, I'm Miriam Schwab. Many people in Hebrew call me Schwab, but my team said to tell you my name is Schwab. No, it's everyone calls me Schwab. They call my kids Schwab. My son was in the army. As a t-shirt, it says Schweppes Bichlal, so it goes to there. I'm the CEO of Stratic. I was formerly the CEO of a web development agency focused on WordPress called Luminea. Did that for many, many years. I think I've been in WordPress for maybe 15 years already. I used to organize the WordCamp conferences in Israel. I did that 5 times. And I've spoken at many WordCamps outside of Israel. WordCamp Europe, US, London, in Israel, obviously meetups and more. And I'm a Ima of 7 children. Yeah, the most important job. And you can find me on Twitter if you are into Twitter, at Miriam Schwab. Okay, so when you have a WordPress site, you essentially have kind of 2 parts to it. You have the admin, which you log into to make changes, right? WP admin. And then you have what the site looks like to people who are visiting it, which is the front end. In standard WordPress, they're very tightly tied together. They're actually like one piece, and it's also known as monolithic. It's like one infrastructure. In Headless, those 2 parts are separated. They are not connected, and the front end, because of that, can be built in different technologies. So a lot of people like this approach because it means they can use React or Vue or whatever they want to build the front end instead of using the PHP-based templates that WordPress is based on. And it gets the information through APIs, whether it's the REST API that's part of WordPress, or there's the WP GraphQL option, and it pulls the information or has the information pushed to the front end, and then it's displayed. So it separates, what is Headless? It separates the front end from the back end. So the content management, it's also known as decoupled, and you can use any technology, like I said, for the front end. The content is accessible via REST, and the front end can also be generated through a static site generation process. So there's your React type of front end, which pulls the information, but there's also a way to decouple your front end from your back end through a static site generation process, which runs across the site and creates a front end that's only a collection of static files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, and the like. So what is static, right? I just said static site generator. It refers to the architecture of the website. It doesn't refer to it being not dynamic. So the word static is unappealing because nobody wants to be static, right? Static sounds boring, static sounds uninteresting. Static sounds like there's nothing interactive that's happening there, and that is not at all the case of what it means. It's just referring to the architecture of the resulting site, which is a collection of static files. Static files meaning they're files that exist in and of themselves. There's not really any manipulation happening to them. It's completely pre-rendered. So also, those static files have been created and delivered or deployed to the front end, and that's how they are. Static site generators are this kind of field of ways to build websites, and you can look it up. There's a site that just lists all types of static site generators that are available. And it is a more sophisticated way of building websites that are static. I don't know how long many of you have been in the web development industry, but when I started building websites, I basically just used Dreamweaver. Yep, that's how old I am. And I would code a page, and then I would FTP it up to a server, and it was a static page. That's not a very sophisticated way of doing it, and also becomes very tricky when you have a lot of content that you have to manage. And that's one of the reasons why WordPress and CMSs like WordPress, but specifically WordPress, became so popular, because once you started having to manage more content, and the content is related to each other, with categories and tags and things like that, managing a site that way is just impossible. And so the CMS came along and solved that in a very powerful way. The static site generator approach is a more sophisticated way of generating these static sites through a templating system. But because the word static is so meh and not exciting, there was a term created for the industry called Jamstack. Have any of you besides the Stratic team heard of the term Jamstack? Okay, cool. So Jamstack it's the term that was coined by the founder of a company called Netlify. Netlify is one of the leaders in this emerging space of headless, decoupled, static types of website building. And the reason he created this term is because nobody is excited about using static. So he needed to create something that was appealing. Plus, the way that he saw this emerging field is in opposition to the LAMP stack. The LAMP stack is what powers WordPress, right? Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And so he wanted it to be clear that this is an opposition, almost the anti-WordPress. And it refers to a way of doing things. It's not exactly a stack. Even though they call it the Jamstack, it's not a stack like LAMP, where it's actually comprised of particular technologies. The Jamstack originally was meant to mean JavaScript, APIs, and markup, but that was kind of silly because even every WordPress site has JavaScript, APIs, and markup, right? So that doesn't really differentiate. So eventually they just took away the J, A, and M meaning something, and it refers to kind of an approach, a philosophy behind website building. And it has to do with decoupling the front-end web layer from the back-end business logic layer. And the approach is based on pre-rendering as much as possible as static files, so that as much of the processing of the load should happen before the user requests the page. When users request pages on your WordPress sites, the WordPress site actually then renders the page for them, right? It builds it for them. It pulls the data in from the database, and it builds the page, and then it's like, here you go, here's the page. And that, on the one hand, is what enables WordPress to be so dynamic and powerful, but on the other hand, it's quite an intense, resource-intensive process. It means that every page is going through that type of process, which can put load on the rest of the server and then impact the rest of the site. Obviously, there's caching and things like that that can help reduce the load, but if any of you have ever dealt with caching, you'll know that it's very, very challenging to configure it in the ideal way. You can either end up over-caching or under-caching, and it can be very tricky. So the idea is to pre-render as much as possible so that all of that heavy process happen before the user is requesting the page. This is just like something that is amusing. So in this Jamstack space, the whole approach originally was static only. But then it's been around now. I think he coined the term maybe 2015, 2016. And people are realizing that if you are too fanatic about making sure that everything is purely static, then you really are limiting what you can do with a website. So they're kind of coming back to a hybrid approach, and they coined this term, server-side rendering, but they don't want to say server-side rendering because that's what we all do in WordPress. So they call it SSR to make it cool, but it's essentially the same thing. So it's just funny how people try to coin things to keep it within their shiny, cool category. So there is overlap between all these terms. So we talked about headless, decoupled, Jamstack, and static. There is overlap. You can have a site that's decoupled and static, or headless and static, and then Jamstack, covers all of that. But why would you even want to go this way? Why is this something that developers are so excited about, and it is a trend that's growing? What is the appeal behind it? So if you have a WordPress site, you may have noticed that it can be slow and sluggish. And this is just a graph showing how WordPress sites have gotten heavier and slower over time. Sites are being hacked every day. There's a new WordPress vulnerability every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Tuesday, and each of those vulnerabilities impacts hundreds of thousands or millions of sites, and we're always in this cat and mouse game of trying to keep our site protected before a hacker finds the vulnerability in our plugin or whatever. Another reason that developers are excited about this approach is that there was a survey done among something like 65,000 developers, asked a lot of questions, and one of them was, what is your most dreaded platform? And WordPress was the most dreaded platform. So if we want WordPress to continue to be a platform that grows and is appealing to people, we need to make sure that developers are interested in working with it. But at the moment, it can be very unappealing to many developers and even dreaded. What is going on your WordPress site? from a security perspective, you have all of these layers and components, and each of which at any given time can have vulnerabilities. From the underlying layers of the operating system, PHP, MySQL, up into the WordPress itself and the plugins. So you're constantly trying to patch and update and keep everything protected. And that is one of the reasons why it's dreaded to developers. Who wants to be doing that all the time? It's just something that you really don't want to be dealing with. And of course, things tend to happen to the WordPress site at the most inconvenient times. We have a customer who recently onboarded who was saying that he's the one who was responsible for the site's uptime and performance. And of course, it crashes on Fridays when they're an Israeli tech company. On Friday, when he's out, that's of course when it happens, or at 2 a.m. So it's very volatile and sensitive. So what are the benefits of going the headless route? Your site is fast because it's pre-rendered. There isn't that process of building the page for your users. All it is oh, you want to see this page? Here it is, it's ready, ta-da, you get it. Also, it can be fully served up through CDN, which is a content delivery network. Content delivery network makes your site available in many locations around the world. So at the moment, if you have a site, a WordPress site, and it's hosted, let's say on an Israeli hosting provider, that means that it's actually physically located here in Israel somewhere. And if you have an international audience, then someone in Canada who wants to visit your site will then have to get that information sent to them from Israel across the ocean. Now, it's not super slow, but it still adds what's called latency to them receiving the information. WordPress sites cannot be fully served through a CDN. You cannot make all of the pages on a WordPress site available in CDN locations around the world because of what I was describing, which is that the pages are rendered for the users when they request it. So the content pages themselves don't actually exist as files, so they cannot be served up through the CDN. In a headless format, and particularly in a static format, every single page on the site exists as a standalone HTML file and can be served up through a CDN. The attack surface is reduced by over 99%. So all of those layers of stuff that's happening in your WordPress site that I showed, from the Apache to the MySQL, et cetera, that's all gone. All of those moving parts that need attention and have potential vulnerabilities are no longer there when you're running the site as static. It's just a collection of static files. And it's very, very hard to breach a site that's comprised of static files. It's not even worth the time of hackers, particularly since a lot of the hackers are hacker bots. They're just looking for known vulnerabilities, and there's nothing to breach there, and they'll move on. So it would take a lot of effort to breach a site that's just fully static. It's effortlessly scalable. If any of you have run a campaign, driven traffic to your site, it gets a sudden influx, or you get suddenly PR, you're mentioned in the press, and you get a lot of traffic to your site. With a standard WordPress server, it means that now that it's starting to work in overtime. It has to render the page, keep running the page. You can try to cache it. Doesn't always work well. And eventually the site can slow down and even crash when you need it the most. When the site is static, it will just scale infinitely and you never have to worry. Our customers say to us, we're about to run a campaign. What do we need to do? We say nothing. Go have a cup of coffee. Everything will be fine. It's not even something they have to consider anymore. It's a shiny new tool. Why is that a benefit? Developers like it. Developers who have to work with WordPress because that's what the company is using are often very mevuasim. They're not excited about it. They're oh, fine, I'll do the thing with the WordPress. But once it's running in a more modern format, it makes them feel more proud of this software that they're working with and happier to work with it. And there's less WP ops. So I thought this term was interesting. DevOps, if you're in tech or whatever, has to do with managing servers. And so WordPress ops, that's all of the aspects of keeping your server healthy, updated, patched, scalable, performant, cached well, et cetera. You don't have to deal with all of that ops anymore. And in some cases, depending on how you build out your headless or static WordPress site, you can use WordPress as usual. So you get all the advantages of that. Okay, so how do you build a headless WordPress site? So first of all, there's the WP REST API, which is part of every WordPress installation. So you've got it right there, and it creates the endpoints, which you can then use for your front end. You have WP GraphQL, which is also a way to build out your headless WordPress sites. And then you can deploy to different platforms. So I mentioned Netlify, there's Gatsby, there's Vercel. There's a lot of different platforms that you can deploy to that are aimed at supporting this type of implementation. But what it means is that you have to take your current WordPress site, throw it in the garbage, build a new site from scratch, build a new front end, build your back end, build out your content model, make sure everything works together. And also it means you're going to have a lot of work going forward every time the marketing person or content writer needs to create a new, let's say, landing page. You can't just use like Elementor. That does not work because it won't apply to the front end. So the cons are it's decoupled, and so it means you can't use WordPress functionality that applies to the front end, like page builders. Even Gutenberg is a problem, Elementor, and the others, Beaver Builder. You can't use them in a decoupled architecture. And there's a lot of stuff that WordPress just does out of the box that we take for granted that you have to recreate in a headless implementation. So I love seeing tutorials about, look, I figured out how to add an RSS feed to my static or headless site. And I'm just like, in WordPress, we have 50,000 RSS feeds, right? You have the main RSS feed and the categories and the tags and the authors and even like comment RSS feeds, and you don't have to do anything. And they're like, oh, I made a main RSS feed. So you would have to recreate that. You have to deal with forms. If you're using form plugins, that won't work anymore. 301 redirects won't just work out of the box. You have to implement it on the edge, etc. And it demands more ongoing developer resources to do things that you could like throw up in a second on a site using Elementor or whatever. And it can be frustrating for non-developers because it creates friction in their workflow and like they can't do things that they used to be able to do. Just another interesting approach to Headless that tries to overcome this, but they were actually recently acquired by Automatic, and I don't think they're developing it anymore, is Frontity, where they were trying to create, instead of PHP themes, you would use React. And then it was trying to be tightly tied together. Very challenging, very cool. It's open source and it's still available. Okay, so if you want to go the static route, which is generating a static version of the site, there's plugins available. There's Simply Static and there's WP2 Static. In both of those cases, you need to set up the whole environment. You have to have the WordPress hosting environment, and then you have to have the static storage environment, and then you have to have the CDN, and you have to make sure that you invalidate the CDN properly when you update the site, and you have to make sure that the WordPress site can handle the load. It can be quite complicated, but it is a free and open source option that's out there that you can check out, and at least also maybe start getting a taste for what this means. But it can be complicated to configure, and also if a site is larger in any way, the build process to static can take a long time. Just FYI, the developer from WP2 Static now works at Static. He's a very smart, cool guy. But yeah, so he's part of Static. Okay, so the pros are, I exported this from Slides, Google Slides, so it got messed up, I see. The pros are it's free, you get static, you can choose your hosting for WordPress. The cons, should be over there, it's complicated to configure, need to make sure the WordPress site scales, and WordPress security is still an issue. The WordPress site is still exposed. One of the benefits of having a static site is that all of that craziness of the WordPress architecture is no longer exposed, but in this case, it is unless you like work hard to kind of protect it. Then you have Static. Oh, isn't that surprising? So I'll tell you about Static and how it, yeah, my team is very, very objective. So Static is an end-to-end platform, and we take care of all of that so that you can use WordPress as usual and then get the static output and get the best of both worlds. So I'll explain how. So first of all, we host the WordPress site. It's in a containerized environment that shuts down when not in use. That's one of the crazy things about WordPress. You have the whole engine running all the time, even if you update your site like once a week. It's crazy. Resource wastage and also just dangerous. It's like a sitting duck. So on WordPress, on Static, it's blocked from the internet. Only people with permission have access to the WordPress site, and it shuts down when not in use. We configure everything for you. You sign up for Static, immediately you get the whole environment. You get the WordPress hosting environment, the static hosting, the CDN. It automatically invalidates when you make changes, etc. So you get to use WordPress as usual, and you get all the headless benefits. You don't have to throw away your site and build a new headless site to get the benefits. You can just use your regular WordPress site. You can have a WordPress staging site on Static, but you also get a static staging site on Static. So if you make changes to your WordPress site and you want to see how it works when deployed to static, you don't have to push it to your production site and then be like, oh shoot, everything broke. You can first go to our staging static, test it, and then push to your production static site. And we have out-of-the-box support for database-driven functionality that wouldn't normally work on static. We replicate it. So we support Gravity Forms and Contact Form 7. We automatically replicate 301 redirects on the edge, so you can take care of all your SEO, it's fine. Search, we replace WordPress search with Algolia search, which is better quality and faster. and you don't have to do anything. It's just out of the box. We support multi-language, WPML and Polylang, and of course RSS feeds. And you have all of the WordPress user management, and there's additional benefits to user management around Static because you can limit who can deploy to the static version of the site if you're a larger team. We also deploy sitemaps, XML sitemaps, and robust.txt. What? WooCommerce. That is a really good question. Just hold that to the end, and I will explain what the situation is with WooCommerce. So basically, with Static, you get your cake and eat it too. We really like cake, so we use this analogy a lot. So basically, you have your WordPress site, which looks a certain way, and then you have the static replica, which actually looks exactly the same. But what's going on under the hood is completely different. On the WordPress site, you have all the stuff that's happening that I showed in that diagram. And on the static site, it's just a simple collection of static files that's basically unhackable, infinitely scalable, very performant and fast because it's pre-rendered, fully served up through the CDN. So it looks the same, acts the same, just much better version. So to build a site that is static compatible, you just have to have a static first mindset. So some things that you would do on WordPress, you might have to do a bit differently so that it will work on the static version. So like use the forms that we support, or use HubSpot forms or MailChimp forms that feed into a third-party service. We have a directory on our site, static tools directory. So you can, if you like want to do something on your site and you're like, I wonder if it'll work on static. First of all, you can test on static, but also you can just look for alternatives. We have it categorized, and you can look for solutions that work perfectly on static. So some of our customers, we have great customers. One of our customers is Payoneer, a very large fintech company. I think Itai, I don't know if he's in the audience, but yeah, he's our main contact there, and we love working with them. And so after moving to Static, they saw an improvement in their conversion rate optimization, which of course is very impactful for a company of that size, just by moving to Static. And we continue to work with them and love working with them, and hopefully they continue to love working with us. So special offer for participants of Press for Word. So anyone who signs up for Static gets a free trial. It's a month, and if you need more time, you can always chat to our amazing customer support, and we'll extend it. But we're happy to offer you 6 months free. So just scan the code. It'll take you to a landing page, and you can just like sign up right there and get going. So the way, a recommended way to get working with Static is when you sign up, you immediately get just like a basic WordPress site, and you can just use that and test it and click our publish button and see how it generates a static version. You can also migrate a copy of your site into Static and then generate a static version of that and see how that works. No cost, no credit card, nothing. And if you have any questions while you're using it, we have a chat bubble. We have very good support, like I said. We also can support you in Hebrew. And you can check it out and just let us know if you have any questions along the way. Sometimes there's things that seem like, oh no, it's not working, but really you just need to talk to us and we'll be like, no, just do that, or that kind of thing. Because it's a pretty different way of doing WordPress, but in the end, you get all of the goodness of WordPress with all of the goodness of Headless. And that did say Toda Rabah properly in Google Slides, but now we'll just say Toda Rabah. And yeah, so I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'll address the WooCommerce question. Okay, so we completely cut the front end from the back end of WordPress. There is no communication with WordPress for security reasons. That means that whatever dynamic functionality we want to work on the front end, we have to replicate it on the edge. So like I said, we have done that with a few types of functionality. We're always doing it with more. With WooCommerce, we have sites running on Static that just use the catalog, but we don't yet support the shopping cart, which I know is basically like, okay, so you don't support WooCommerce because that's the most important part of it. But we do have plans to support WooCommerce. We have a lot of people who contact us because WooCommerce sites are terribly slow and have a lot of issues, and also security, it can be a big issue. So we will be hopefully supporting that. I don't have like a timeline on it, but you can just sign up for our updates or whatever, and we'll let you know once that's rolled out. But the bottom line is, at the moment, we don't support WooCommerce. We do have customers using headless e-commerce solutions that do work on Static. And we have in that static tools directory some options of e-commerce solutions that work well on Static, so you can check them out too. So that's about WooCommerce. Anyone else want to ask a question? We can take maybe one. Yes. Like analytics and stuff? All works perfectly. One of the good things about the timing of what we're doing is that so much is JavaScript based anyways. So Hotjar, Google Analytics, like HubSpot tracking. HubSpot works perfectly with Stratic. It all works fine. Anything that's JavaScript, like even our intercom chat, right? That's what we use. It works fine because it's all client side. So anything that's client side works on Stratic, including like analytics and tracking and things like that. Yes?
So I remember like a year and a half or 2 years ago that around Jamstack on that was having this huge thing about, Jamstack is not WordPress. So can you sort of speak to that coming, from WordPress-based,
Like what's WordPress's relationship to Jamstack kind of thing, yeah? Yeah, is that what you're asking, like the relationship?
Right.
Yeah.
Is there like a shift, also within the WordPress community?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the co-founder of WordPress and the founder of Automatic, his name is Matt. And the founder of Netlify is also named Matt. And they had a showdown at a conference about a year ago, Matt versus Matt. It was called a fireside chat where they just kind of just bashed each other the whole time going, Jamstack sucks, WordPress sucks, Jamstack sucks. Okay, so that's how the conversation has been going for a long time between these two worlds. But over the last year, there's definitely been an evolution from both sides in terms of how they see each other. So in the WordPress, first of all, Automatic invested in Stratic and in Frontity. So while there's like this caution or kind of a little bit of distrust around this new trend, there's also recognition that it is the future of the web. So they do want to have part in that and support it. And WP Engine recently released a headless product called Atlas. It's very cool and super complicated, but it does exist. And Automatic themselves recently built out a very large headless implementation for Al Jazeera, which they use in a lot of their content marketing. So there's definitely a shift towards, okay, maybe we need to be part of this. It's also inevitable, and also it just makes a ton of sense, and it solves a lot of issues around WordPress. And with regards to Jamstack used to be, basically was the anti-WordPress, except for that even they're starting to realize, well, if WordPress is almost 43% of the internet, and by the way, projected to be 50% by 2025, then maybe we can't ignore it. It's a market that we need to be interested in. And maybe also, if WordPress is that big, they've been doing something right. So there's definitely emerging respect for the WordPress industry and more interest in collaborating. Stratic is in a really unique space in that we're not fully all just standard WordPress, and we're not standard Jamstack. We allow people to use WordPress in its native state and then benefit from this kind of Jamstack approach. And so we can be kind of a bridge between these worlds, and that's in some ways what's happening. So there's definitely been an evolution, and the relationship is warming up, and everyone's stopping to pretend the other side doesn't exist and starting to talk to each other. So that's where it's at. All right, you have to eat.
Yes,
so,
I want you to eat, guys. Thank you very much, Miriam. That was so great.
Thank you very much to Miriam. Wait, everybody.